Last week, on Sunday, I asked the question and we discussed the idea, are you fun to live with? And I ended with the idea about how much fun, I think that's an awful shallow word to use when we talk about Jesus, because he was so much more than that. But all the same, I mentioned how much fun or how beneficial, how great it was to be around Jesus. And we talked about impacting the world. That if we as Christians are going to impact the world, we are going to be something different than people who have all the right arguments and all the right criticisms and all the right gotchas. We're going to be people who add value to people's lives, because that's what Jesus did constantly. In fact, he was picking these people who had been so oppressed, so abused by the religion of their day. And he was saying, no, there's something completely different. I am of my Father. And I want you to know the Father. And so let me demonstrate for you the Father. Boy, what a wonderful, wonderful thought. Uplifting, encouraging. I mean, I don't know about you. I was already up and bouncing around, but just makes you want to bounce out of the pew and go do something good, right? I hope that's the idea. But Wednesday night, I talked about the other side of that. And that was that if we are Christians, not everyone's going to like you. You see, as great as Jesus was to be around, people didn't all like him. Now, we sometimes emphasize one side or the other, and so everyone hated Jesus. No, multitudes were flocking after him. That's true. And it's also equally true that people, this whole other great big group of people, hated him. Hated him. But you know who we don't read about very much? They are mentioned in Scripture. In fact, in Revelation, the letter to Laodicea kind of talks, I think, about these people. But we don't read very much about people who were just neutral. Yeah, that came in contact with Jesus and were not attracted nor repelled. They were just neutral. And one of the conclusions that I think that suggests for us as Christians is that if we are living the life we are meant to live, it's going to be a life that's noticed. You see, it's going to have a life that has an impact. It's not all going to be good. It should all be good from our standpoint to the best of our ability, empowered by Christ. But it's not all going to be accepted great, right? And it's not all going to be hated, but it's going to be hated. In fact, John 15, Jesus said, listen, they have hated me. He's just hours from his betrayal and ultimate death. They have hated me, and the student's not greater than master. And so they're going to hate you. Wow. Not so much the line of thinking that makes us want to jump out of the pews and go do something, right? Maybe we could use a little bit of camouflage. You ever think about Christian camouflage? We have all kinds in these parts of the world. We have all kinds of camouflage, don't we? Yeah. And that's where the lesson comes from today. The chameleon church. Now, someone tell me, what's chameleon known for? noteworthy for not being noticed. He blends in, and really this is the extent to which we're going to deal with this topic, how not to stand out or make a difference. If we don't want to stand out, if we don't want to make a difference, we need to blend in. That's just about as much as I'm going to say about that. Because I think we've already illustrated, and Scripture illustrates, that that's not what you are called to do. You're called to stand out. But think for a moment why you would camouflage. Why are snakes camouflaged? The first thought that comes to many of our minds is about attacking. But it's believed by people smarter and better educated and more educated than me that that's not the primary function of the snake's camouflage. Snake's camouflage is defensive. As much as we, repel. I've told you the story about accidentally pulling a water snake out of my pond, and Christian said you screamed like a little girl. And Tom, I didn't. That was my snake repellent call. Right? And so as much as we repel from them, we're way bigger than they are. They're looking for protection, right? They're looking for protection. And so there's some natural incentives, encouragement for you and I to blend in, right? To not stand out too much. I mean, some of you all, you see how much I call on people, and I hope that's encouragement and keeps you on your toes a little bit. But some of you all see how much I call on people throughout my lessons, and so you look down all the time. Right? That's a form of camouflage. That's so you don't get noticed, right? And so there's reasons not to stand out. Why are we incentivized? Why do we feel such a desire to not stand out? Remember the very first lesson I gave on how to survive lion attacks? And we dealt with the scientists who were marking, I believe, with the red blotch on the front shoulder of zebras to identify, okay, we looked at this guy, he's been on. Casey, do you remember what happened to those marked zebras? Anna remembers. They died. How'd they die, Anna? Yeah, they were different, so the lion, singled them out and ate them. There's a good reason not to be different. There's a good reason in this world not to be different. You don't want to be criticized? Don't do. Right? Don't do. And sometimes we're tempted to bring that idea with us into the church, aren't we? Yeah. If you're receiving no criticism, well, try doing something. You'll get there. I promise. Right? It will come. Now, in the world, it is a matter of life and death. And in the world, for us as people, not just in the animal kingdom, but for us, it is a matter of life and death. Our tribes, our circles are all circled and all have to do with being alike, not standing out. I mean, Friday we were at a minister's meeting, and we came out of the meeting, and we're walking down the road in Indiana, and leaning up against the wall is this girl that looks unique. She stands out, right? I couldn't dress like her as in style if I tried to. I was saying, what is that style? What kind of style is it? Here's my point. And I said hello, and she was shocked I spoke to her. That tells us a lot about people that stand out, right? I said hello, and I just breathed. And as I got in the vehicle, I noticed two of her friends came out of the shop. And guess what? They had the same style. Even when we stand out, We want to make sure we look like someone else. Well, here's the thing, and that's all the reasons why it's difficult. But as Christians, we are called to be different. We are called to be unlike anyone else in the world. To be noticed. To be noticed. Is that dangerous? Christ proved it is. But before we move on, I want you to think about this. That little rubber ducky. You all know which one I'm talking about, right? Yeah, he stands out. That little rubber ducky, you know which one I'm talking about, don't you, Jason? The purple one, you've got it. I didn't even have to say it. Imagine now that we're not talking about his color. We're not talking about a dried paint. Imagine now we are talking about his illumination. His ability to share light. Some of the things Jesus described the church, hence talking about God's people, was that they were to be a light on a hill, a city on the hill. What's a city on the hill do? It spreads light. It stands out. It impacts all these people around them. We are to be the salt of the earth. And if we lose our saltiness, we're worthless. Right? If we lose what's different about us, we're different. What does salt do? It impacts everything it comes in contact with. So imagine little purple ducky is not just purple, he's illuminated. Do you know he has contact with 6 other duckies? You can count them if you want. Yeah. If he's illuminated, he impacts 6 other duckies. Did he just change his community? But here's the big thing. The next circle, those duckies, moving outward, don't have contact with an additional 12, which would be double. They have contact with 14. You counting, Corey? No? Okay. You're like, okay. They have contact with 14 additional ducks. You see, and really that's the picture that Jesus paints. Not just that Jesus paints, he told his disciples all about it, but we see it taking place after his death. You see, Jesus had essentially 12 around him. And in around that, there's probably, sometimes we think Jesus is moving in a herd of 13, but there's like a bunch of other, at least 120 around that circle, right? And inside of 30 short years, they've turned the world upside down. You can't do that without standing out. And we can't change the world, yea, Summerville, yea, our own household, without standing out. You see, Kevin read for us this passage that he started in verse 9, where Peter says of God's people, you, race, a priesthood, a holy nation, a people of his own possession. Did you read from King James? So you are a peculiar people. You ever been called peculiar? I have many times, not normally in the sense of this verse. A peculiar people. What's the idea of a peculiar? It's God, peculiar to God, God's own people. I think as Christians, sometimes we grab that first circle, right? That first circle of understanding. But look at the next circle. That you may proclaim the excellence of him who called you out of darkness to his marvelous light. You see, as we look at the world around us today, broken, isn't it? It's broken. Wow. Families, health, communities, nations, the world is broken. Your story, my story, is not just being different, although it is to be different. Why? Because we're not meant to be all the people who lament and cry and complain about all the problems in the world. We're meant to have the answers. Now, what's that mean? Is my relationship with my wife perfect? Amanda's out there, so you can't, is there an anti-amen? No, that's not the way I have all the answers. Here's what I know. The closer I am to Christ, the more I emulate His way of living in mine, the more I am what I'm meant to be. That's how we have the answers. That's how we're different. That's how we don't become, let me borrow from some future words, as sounding symbols in the world. You know, Christians, the most relevant, the most used description of Christians in the last survey I saw was irrelevant. Most common description of people surveyed. What's that saying? We're sounding symbols. Did you hear it? You heard it. Did you like it? You did not. Was it beneficial? It was not. Right? The way that we are not sounding symbols is by impacting our lives, impacting our families, and just simply striving to live a life that's truly different. You see, Nathan, our ministers me on Friday, presented for our Devo for our ministers, our preachers at Indiana congregation. And he mentioned something, and we're going to look at 1 Samuel's 7th chapter, that to me was a good reminder. It's something I've been working through in the last 10 years or so of my Christian walk. You see, I used to look at the stories of the Old Testament as a whole bunch of stories, just kind of lumped together. And as kids, that's how we kind of learn them, because we can grab a hold of and know small stories, and that's useful. But as we get a little bit older, we start to see how they fit in. And so as I got older, I could understand how they fit into the timeline and how they were related a little bit better. But as Christians, I don't think we're real good at understanding what all these stories are about. And the fact that they are truly one story. This is from a group that I'm not familiar with, One Story. But the artwork is borrowed from the Bible Project. And the Bible Project does a really good job of dealing with this, as did, I don't know if you recall, God's love story that we looked at a few years ago, putting all these stories into the overall narrative. And that overall narrative, I'll use the pointer on the screen so it's seen online, not just to you folks, but that story starts with Adam and Eve being created, and they're put in the middle of the garden, and they're told what? To rule and have dominion. And isn't it so ironic that we just struggle as people to not even envision those words in the way God would have them mean, but rather that we're just going to have our way with all people and the whole world and all relationships. And that's what rule and dominion means to the Gentile world, Paul would say, but not to God's people. You see, because Adam and Eve were meant to represent the image of God. And in comes sin. And you see, as we decline down towards the flood, we see for the first time in our story what it looks like for mankind to roll the way they want to roll. You see, when I do things my way and my way only, and it's all about me and what I want, yeah, there's something instinctive about that says, that's all right for me. But it's not, we all know this, it's not good for you. And here's the anecdotal evidence and the well-supported evidence from all of history. It's not good for me either. And so all these stories is God bringing mankind back and saying, listen, you can be different. And finally, we have this story with Abraham, and you notice it's completely different than the rest of the stories in that it is a covenantal relationship. I'm going to make a promise. I'm going to make a contract. I'm going to have a covenant with you. And you know what Abraham was told amongst many other things? Abraham, you're going to be great. You're going to have many, many children. That was a good thing. And you are going to bless all nations. Your seed is not just Israel, not just your family, not just your lineage. The whole world is going to be blessed by you. But Corey on Wednesday nights, he just did a horrible job of that. Well, Corey didn't. The material he was dealing with, right, from the book of Judges. Did the people accomplish that? How about their judges, their deliverers that God gave them? No. God keeps giving them these people, and they are meant to draw them back. You're to be different. But what was the problem? You see, God kicked all these people out of that promised land so that Israel could live differently. And he says, the day you live just like they did, I'm going to spew you out of the land. There's some graphic imagery, isn't there? But the people never, ever live up to that. You see, as much as Israel tried, and we pick on them for a lot, but I believe they tried. I believe that because they are people. They never came close to doing it. But the story of the New Testament is a different kind of people. A people of a different kind of kingdom. You see, where we represent God's role on earth. Not done through government, not done through force, not done through power. But Zechariah, I believe it's 8:4 says, by the will of the Spirit. By God's Spirit. By God's Spirit. Now that's getting so different, right? That whole idea of what we are called to gets to be so different, it's, could you say uncomfortable? Yeah, I think uncomfortable. I want to draw your attention back because I mentioned the judges, and these judges, in short, they were flawed themselves. They weren't doing what God wanted them to do, but they were constantly saying, hey, we've got to come back to God. We've got to come back to God. And the last judge was Samuel. At which point the people said, now listen, we've tried this experiment. It's not working. We're moving on. But listen to what they say. Then all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah and said to him, behold, you are old and your sons do not walk in your ways. Where are they getting at? The next leaders? We don't want them. I can understand they were correct about his sons. Here's where they go off. Now appoint for us a king to judge us like all the nations. You know what the people just said in context of our lesson today? Lord, give us a king so we don't stand out. Now think about this. God said, you are my people. They were in slavery for some 400 years, and they were in idolatry, and God comes and utterly, in a few short days, wipes out all of Egypt's kings. Did you ever notice that's what the plagues are? They are systematically disassembling the Egyptian religion, saying to God's people, I'm the true God. And I'm going to give you a nation. I'm going to give you a land that's better than anything else you've ever seen. And when you get that land, I am going to take care of you, and I will bless you in every way. And in return, you are to live like my people. And what does Mike say? But I'd rather be like the other nations. Right? I'd rather be like the other nations. Evie, you just turned 14. I don't have to put up with you driving for at least 2 years. I'm grateful for that. But Evie, for those of you who don't know this, she likes cars. Not just all cars. She likes the special cars, the status symbols. Not the ones you're thinking of. She doesn't want a Mercedes or even a Benz. She wants a Lamborghini. But she's got the wrong daddy. Now, Evie, we're going to have to get really wild with our imaginations for a moment. Can you imagine for your 16th birthday, don't get your hopes up, it ain't happening, I give you a Lamborghini. You can't even imagine it. Try really hard. Can you see it? What color is it? White. It's white. Not the color I foresaw, but it's not my dream. Light Lamborghini. And what does Evie say? Shh, shh. Dad, no one else at school drives a Lamborghini. I'd rather have a Ford Fusion like Christian. Because Eddie, quite obviously can't have anything any nicer. Right? Can you imagine? I want to be like everyone else. Wow. Really puts to light. Not them, but me. I want to live like everyone else. I want what they have. I want all these things. But we are called to be different. And so I ask a question. How are you? How are you different? How are you called to be different? I don't want any participation in this part. I just want you to think, as a Christian, how are you to look different than the rest of the world? And as you think about that, ask yourself, as you look around the world today, right, as you pull up your devices, and I'm not just giving you permission to do this right now, but you pull up your devices and you start looking at all the things going on in the world around you. How are you called to be different? How is your life different than all the news broadcasts that you get? How is your life different than all the social media scrolling that you see? How are your posts different than the rest of the world? And as though that's not difficult enough of a question, I'll move on that rapidly and say, how are we different? How are we the church? How are we, God's people, different than the rest of the world? In a lot of our literature for probably at least 15 years, it may date back that way, that may date prior to that, but I've taken note of it for at least 15 years now. One of the common themes in our literatures within the church is this concern about losing our distinctiveness, our identity. And a lot of good brethren are really, really worried about that. Here's my question as it pertains to that. How are we called to be different? In other words, what is it that is meant to make us distinctive and to stand out from the world? We're in 1 Corinthians in our Sunday morning Bible study. But Paul eventually, he's got a lot of problems to deal with. You know how the Corinthians were not different than the rest of the world? Is they didn't not have problems. They were just like the rest of the world that way. Why is it that Paul still acknowledges them as God's people? They're tied up in some pretty wicked stuff. How is it that he acknowledges them as God's people? Here's one way they were different. They were striving to be different. Mike, can you imagine if someone said to you, Mike, don't be a heartline any longer? Now, I don't mean in name, I mean in action. Do you have some heartline mannerisms and personality traits? I'd imagine you do, and I don't know your family well enough, but I certainly wasn't going to bring the idea of Smith traits up. There's just too many of us, right? But I'll say this about Christian. I hear this constantly. Someone just talked to him on the phone the other day, said, I haven't had a conversation with that boy yet, but man, does he look and move and talk and act like you. Sorry. Can you imagine if I said to Christian, quit being a Smith? What if he changed his name? Wouldn't matter. Wouldn't matter. And you see, these Christians struggle not being of the flesh because it's what they are. It's what they've been their whole life. It's not like just throwing some magic switch and everything's all better. I know we'd like it that way, but that would defeat the purpose of God becoming human and God using humans to fix all these things. Paul says, now concerning food offered to idols, we know that all of us possess knowledge. All of us. You know what he's talking about? Some people knew that you shouldn't eat that food offered to idols. Some people knew that there was no such thing as an idol, and therefore, whether you ate that food, it really didn't matter at all. He says, we all possess knowledge. But knowledge puffs up. What's he talking about? You see, if Tom and I are engaged in conversation and I'm puffed up, that's me. He says, knowledge. If I'm smarter than Tom, it's me that's shown out in that, right? But love builds up. What's our desires, people? Right? What's the driving force behind God and His people? To build up. To lift up, to make better. My last video I did for Solely Jesus, I dealt with this idea of John 3, and we all know 16, don't we? But sometimes we stop before we read 17 that Jesus came not into the world to condemn the world, but to save it. Through him the world might be saved. You see, the idea of Jesus was not to beat the world was already broken. It was to lift up and to save. And what's verse 3 or 16 say his motivation was? He loved us. I certainly don't deserve it. Maybe one of you do. But the odds are against you. Are we different because of what we know? Because we have the right answers. Because we can instruct on what you ought to do. You know, if these two are having an argument in their marriage, I know it doesn't ever happen. But you know what's pretty easy? It's pretty easy to say, here's what you need to do, right? Probably had people do that to the extent they knew. You know what's really hard to do? To live in such a way that I'm a help to them. That's difficult, right? That's really difficult. As a church, how are we different? Now, you'll like this part because I intend on bashing on preachers for a moment. But just a short moment, now move on quickly. Do you ever notice what Paul says? If I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love. If I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, is it applicable to say if our churches have the best sermons ever? Is that what makes good church? Really, really good sermons. Y'all obviously don't believe that. And have not love. You see, as a church, if we have the very best of sermons and we're missing the point of love, clang. If I have all prophetic powers, I have all the answers. I have all the right answers. I know what's going to happen. I know what ought to be. Understand all mysteries and all knowledge. And if I have all faith as though to remove mountains, James said, I'll show you my faith. Right? We have the kind of faith that can be seen. We have the kind of faith that could heal all of the people that were on that list. Squeeze the button again. To impact all the people and heal all the people we had on the list earlier. I have the kind of faith that can move mountains. I have to turn and read this part because it sure isn't what comes naturally, is it? But have not love, I'm nothing. Nothing. Now it gets really good. If I give away all that I have, you know, in Acts 2, the converts to the cause of Christ were so devoted, they cashed in everything and said, man, I'm going to help people out. That's kind of foreign to us, you know. I'm not going to be taken advantage of, right? These people are all in. All in. If I give away everything, oh, look what I've done. If I deliver my body to be burned, these people understood what that meant. They were on the very brink of horrible persecution. You know, the kind of things we say today, all words are words, and, you know, God knows my heart and all that. good stuff. These individuals were said, deny Christ and you can live. Deny Christ and I won't boil your children to get alive. And much, much more horrific ideas. And they gave up their own bodies and the bodies of their loved ones. That's what Paul's talking about. And have not love. I gain nothing. Wow. I gain nothing. How are we, as God's people, to be different? I think Jesus addressed this directly, didn't we? By this, as he's talking to his disciples, he's getting ready to go to the cross. Is this the only thing Jesus taught? No. He says, this is what's going to make people notice you. By this, all people will know that you are my disciples. What is it? What is it? How are we to be different? By this, all people will know that you are my disciples if you have love for one another. Something occurs to me as I study these things and pray about them. The world needs a lot from us as Christians. The world needs to know God and His Son, which is eternal life. There are some things that we need to strive to be right on. A lot of things. Because they're God's way. But what's different than us about than the rest of the world? I promise you, if you turn the television on this morning, there are hundreds of people telling you what's right. Every news broadcast, every religion broadcast, everything. You open up Facebook, you will come across hundreds of people telling you what's right. But what this world does not have, in any real and significant way, separate and apart from Jesus Christ, is true love. True love. And so I don't want to blend in. I don't want to be like the rest of the world. I want to be different. And I think to the extent I can do that, my family will be better. Your family will be impacted in a positive direction. Our community will be impacted in a positive direction. Our future will be bright. And we will be people who are noticed. Have you noticed Jesus Christ in your life today? If He's not at the center and on the throne of your life, I encourage you to make that known. Let us assist you as you strive to make those next steps of faith as together we stand and sing.